Once again, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Naquan McLean. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Education Council Consortium. The Education Council Consortium mission is to develop and support public school parents through educational networking and organizing. We have our partner tonight with AQE, which is the Alliance for Quality Education, which is a state led voice, leading voice for education justice. We will be hearing from some presenters tonight. Uh, AQE and ECC have put on the series. Our first series of presentation was with current or former school board members. We had that panel. Then we had a panel with PEP members, and the PEP members are the Panel for Education Policy. So you're going to hear a lot of acronyms tonight. I'm going to do my best not to say them, or if I do say them, to give you the description or the definition of the acronyms. So we had a panel with our PEP members, which is the Panel for Education Policy. We had some former and current PEP members on that panel. And then tonight we have the distinguished honor to have former chancellors that I'll get to introduce them in a minute. But we want to just welcome you tonight again and thank you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-facilitator for tonight. As you know, that youth is very important to us, and youth is very important to this system, and this is why we do it every single day, the work that we do. So I'm going to turn it over to our youth member who will be co-facilitating with me tonight. She's going to introduce herself, and she's going to take us further in tonight's program.
Hi, my name is Mariama Jallo, and I'm with the Yaya Network. Um, I started work at the Yaya Networks last year, so this is probably like 2 years since I've been doing it now. And I just want to say welcome to everybody who's came here. It is very exciting to have all of you guys listening. And really, the goal of this whole meeting is to inspire people to imagine what a new and better system, a new, better education system would look like, and to get staff, students, and parents to be inspired in a more meaningful way to make decisions about like their school communities and what they really want their school to look like in the future.
Thank you so much. Let's give our co-facilitators some love, guys. Let's give us some love. It's not easy doing this. All right, so just one announcement before we get into our presentation for tonight. On tomorrow at 2 p.m. on Zoom, the ECC will be releasing a report on school governance. We have commissioned a writer to bring together some history on school governance. So we're going to be having a press release tomorrow. We're going to ask Jonathan, who is our chair of our school governance committee, if he can drop the registration link inside of the chat so that folks could have it to register. We hope that you all that's joined us tonight could join us tomorrow. We think that it's very important that people understand the structure of mayoral control and just understand the history of school governance in New York City. So thank you for that. Now we're going to get ready for what we all came here for tonight. And the first question, or what I want to talk about quickly, is what does the chancellor do? This question often comes up. What is the responsibility of the chancellor? We know that New York City is a very unique city. It is the largest school system in this country. And we know, or those of you who may not know, that the chancellor responsibility is codified in New York State Law 2590. And we wanted to just give you a brief of like a brief line of what they do. And basically, the chancellor's responsibility is the day-to-day operations of New York City. Well, we don't want to call it New York City Public Schools, the Department of Education. They're responsible for curriculum. They're responsible for budgets. They're responsible for the hiring and removal of superintendents. They're responsible for anything that affects your child. The chancellor is responsible for that, being the head of this system. So tonight we have the distinguished honor to be um, on a panel with two different chancellors for two different periods of time, and we're going to get into introducing them, but we first have an icebreaker that we want to do.
So yeah, the icebreaker that we're going to do is first you're going to state your name, your borough, and your organization. And the question is, what is the current chancellor's full name? And you're going to drop that in the chat if you know.
All right, we're going to now introduce our panelists for tonight. I'm not going to go into details because some of this they're going to speak about, so I don't want to give away some of the answers, but we do have the honor and privilege to be joined by two distinguished gentlemen. The first one, both of them actually holds a special part in my heart, and I'll say that. I'll tell you why. I'm going to start with Dr. Rudy Crew. Dr. Rudy Crew was actually the chancellor when I was in high school. Um, and so I'm dating myself, but Dr. Rudy Crew was the chancellor when I was in high school. And Dr. Richard Carranza was the chancellor when I really got to see a lot of equity work done. So Dr. Richard Carranza. Dr. Carranza, welcome. Thank you. Thank you both for joining us. It reminds me of those COVID days when you got thrown out of the Zoom room. All right. So we're going to get right into our questions. And our first question is, and this is where you can, give a little bit about who you are. It is, who appointed you? What mayor? How long did you serve? And three words or one sentence describe your experience as chancellor. And we're going to start with Dr. Crew.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to express my appreciation to all of the various groups that have put this together tonight. And Mariama, it's wonderful to see you as a part of this group. I very much appreciate your perspective and your talent. The person who appointed me was Rudy Giuliani. And at that time, there was a board of education. And the chairperson of the board at that time was Carolyn Gresser from Queens. But Rudy appointed five of the, I think, five of the members of the board at that time. The words that I would use to describe the chancellorship were, one would be very personal, because New York is my home, and what happens in the state, what happens in the city, mattered to me very deeply. It was a job that I actually believed, when I was in graduate school, it was something that I aspired to. Didn't know that I'd ever get it, but it was just in my mind as one of the premier jobs of the nation, if not the world, in this field. And so one part of this would have been personal. The second word that I would use would be, it was exhausting. You can only imagine the interactions that are required to negotiate your way through almost every single element of leadership, whether it be fiscal or human relations and human resources, negotiations. There were just so many different places where it sort of focused on how well you are able to be a human being in the negotiating about other human beings' lives. And that's why I would use that word. The third word would be exciting. I found every day to be filled with something that was extraordinary. And usually it had to do with children in a classroom or in a school, people beating the odds against poverty, against all kinds of discrimination, parents who were indefatigable in their pursuit of a higher degree of quality education for their children, I was just inspired by the amount of effort that teachers and school principals put into this work. And so there was never a time in my mind when I could see myself saying, oh, well, sort of good enough for government work, kind of thing. It was never like that for me at all. This was incredibly rich with the human endeavor and the ability for people to have the grit to never ever give up. So I was inspired by that.
Thank you so much. How you doing, Dr. Carranza? Do you want me to repeat the question or do you have it?
I have the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you very much. And I apologize. I'm falling victim to the Verizon outage across the country. But I also want to start off by thanking all of the organizers so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be in your presence. Mariama, it's as Chancellor Crew said, just a real pleasure to see a student voice and a student leader be part of this conversation as well. And with that, I also want to thank everybody for taking time to be here. So, if I had to pick, a word, it's hard to pick 3 words or even one sentence, but I would start by organizing my comments as saying, well, before I even get there, I was appointed by Mayor Bill de Blasio. I was his second chancellor. I followed Chancellor Carmen Farina, who started his mayoralty as chancellor, and then I succeeded her as his second chancellor. I served as the chancellor for 3 years in New York City. And as I was saying, it's difficult to pick 3 words. I think Chancellor Crew did a beautiful job of explaining it. So the organizing sentence for me would be the greatest honor of my life, because I never ever thought I'd be a chancellor. In fact, I never thought I'd be a superintendent or even a principal for that matter. So for me, everything that Chancellor Crew stated about the position and just the breadth and the depth and the absolute energetic way you have to tackle that position is true for me as well. But as someone that never ever thought would be the chancellor of New York City, I definitely saw that as an opportunity to make an impact, particularly in communities and for communities that had historically been underserved or forgotten in the greatest city in the world. So I was going to leave it all on the field. I think I left it on the field. Some people probably preferred to leave it on some other field, but it was the greatest honor of my life, and I'm proud of the work that we were able to do in New York City.
Thank you so much. All right, let's move into our questions for this evening. Tell us about a story of an aspect of the system that works. What is one of your accomplishments most proud of? And how were you able to accomplish it? I'm going to start with Dr. Carranza.
Yeah, so the system is big, it's unwieldy, and many times it seems like nothing works in the system. However, prior to coming to New York City, I served as a superintendent in the Houston Independent School District, which was a large system. It was the 7th largest in the country at the time, the largest in the state of Texas. And I served with the democratically elected school board. I had 9 trustees in the Houston Independent School District. So I had real experience with working with trustees. And I would say that the reason I mention that is that when we had a little weather event called Hurricane Harvey that impacted the city of Houston during my superintendency there, it was not only addressing the challenges associated with that natural disaster and devastating disaster. It decimated the city and the schools, but almost negotiating and bringing 9 board members with you together around making decisions about authorizing me as a superintendent to make decisions in an emergency situation, getting approvals to move the system. And to say that that was a quick and easy job would be absolutely not true. It was difficult because you had to move people in the same direction, many of whom saw their governance as actually not governance, but actually administrative leadership. That being said, I juxtapose that with another global incident that happened during my chancellorship called the pandemic, the global pandemic. And the reason I picked that is that it was a very different experience being a chancellor within a system that had mayoral control because in all real sense, I was on par with all the other commissioners. So what that meant was that when we addressed what was happening and the needs that were happening during the pandemic and the shuttering of schools within 72 hours and sitting at the table with the other commissioners in the city government of New York City in the Situation Room, and the message being very clear from the chief executive of the city, the mayor, and saying, we are not going to spare any expense. We're going to do whatever we need to do, and we're going to wrap ourselves around our health department and our schools. There was a level of efficiency in that emergency situation that I really appreciated. And our goal was obviously, as everybody's goal, we wanted to keep our students, our staff, the people who serve our students, we wanted to keep everybody safe and alive. While still being able to feed people, still being able to try to continue the educational process in whatever way that looked. But it really was an all hands on deck, which I appreciated having the support and the direction of the mayor to be able to make that happen. So I would say that that accomplishment, it wasn't easy, it was not perfect, but I'm proud of how our teachers, our parents, our staff, our support staff, our first responders all rallied around trying to keep people safe and trying to keep that educational process continuing to move forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crew.
Yeah, there are many examples of where I felt, as I said earlier, where I felt inspired about just the level of granularity and impact of the work itself. The two best examples are two of the ones that come to mind immediately, stem from the implementation of the arts citywide. I know when I first got there, there were issues connected with district by district funding for the arts, some of which had an enormous array of arts and performing arts programs, and some of which had none at all. Some of which had budgeted for it, others of which were completely burdened by no budget to be able to implement the arts. And the reason this was important to me, apart from the fact that my father was a jazz musician, I just believe that the arts are a way people make understanding and they make knowledge and make sense out of the world, and whether that world is the world of reading, the world of math, the rhythm, rhyme patterns that exist in the human experience as reflected through the arts are ways that people understand themselves and their culture and their neighborhoods and so forth. And there's a richness to that that is always part and parcel of how people understand their own cognitive sort of development. So I really liked the fact that there was a full court press on the implementation of the citywide arts programs, and I so appreciated the numbers of art organizations, the people who are parents in communities that didn't have it, who really pushed hard for being able to have more of the arts experience for their children, and not necessarily just because they saw their kids as needing to become an artist or a performer in some way. It wasn't so much about an occupational pursuit. It was about the human experience of understanding how to interact with other people in ways that allow them to experience language or math or computational skills in ways that gave people a chance to see that they were really able to do it. Now, it might not necessarily be true that on test day, they were able to do it quite the same way. But it was true that they had the acumen, they had the ability to be able to understand these concepts and see them in their own repertoire of skills that I thought really got the main was part of the main frame of that whole arts movement. And the second one was I spent a fair amount of time, excuse me, in the issue of literacy when I was chancellor. Again, largely it was very personal. I didn't read until I was way in almost into middle school, and my phobia had to do with the fact that I could see the word and understand the word, but I just probably couldn't say it as fluently in a sentence, and I struggled with that, and I was hoping that nobody would ever have to struggle with that, because it's something you carry with you as a thorn in your mind for a very long period of time. And the reading work that we did, the literacy work that we did, was enormously impactful in how we then started the Chancellors District, because there were children who needed either more time or they needed a different means by which to acquire the skill of reading, and they were really in need of full attention to this issue, and their teachers needed it as well. And so my example would be, there was a student whose name I won't use now, but I know it as I know my own children's names, and she was a first grader, and she saw me on a television program, and she wrote me a letter. And this television program had to do with literacy, and why was I doing so much in the world of literacy, and so on and so forth. And she wrote me a letter, and she said, I saw you on television, and you looked scared. And her letter went on to say, I just want you to know I'm at such and such a school in the Bronx, and I am able to read. She was a first grader. She said, I'm able to read. I would love for you to come to my school someday and see me read. And I don't know, I'm sure other chancellors would respond the same way, but I could not avoid going to see this young person. I went to see her at her school. She was standing or sitting at a chair. And then as soon as I came in, I guess a student who recognized me or something pointed me out. And she rose to her feet and she said, and I wore my best dress today. and it stays with me because it's so symptomatic of why, as I said, you're inspired. Why, yeah, the hill to climb is a tall one. Learning how to read, learning reading with comprehension, that's not easy, especially if your first language is not English. But my God, the enormity of effort and the power of those people doing that work and struggling through it was so inspiring that I've remembered this young woman's name forever. Those would be two examples of things that really stuck out to me in my chancellorship.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to our youth leader who will give the next questions.
Now that everybody has given their lovely proposals and ideas, how do you think you would want to implement that? How do you think there will be challenges and barriers of implementing those sorts of proposals and ideas that you just shared? And I'll sit to actually anybody who's ready to speak can go.
I'll go.
Yeah,
it's a great question. It's a great question. I think that the tension, and there are many, but the tension is, number one, is there a real coalescing of support for the work? Part of the role of chancellor is to actually build consensus, if not consensus, at least a base of support for moving forward. It's difficult to move if you don't have any input from the communities that are going to be affected by the work that you want to do. So I think you really do need to have a base of support. And the potential pushback in that is obvious. I mean, there are people who don't believe that you ought to be doing this work, or they think that something else is of a higher priority. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, part of what is required is you have to negotiate this. You do have to actually put the idea out there and let it get, sort of beaten around, and socialized in ways that give people opportunities to see that this is important and why it's important and how it's going to impact them in their homes. The second thing is that I would say is that the other place where there's tension is there money to do this? And again, in my case in the arts, I had to go to other organizations. Frankly, it wasn't just the mayor, although I have to be honest, he was very helpful in being able to restore the arts to New York City. But it's not just getting the money there, but it's about organizing other agencies, other community-based organizations that are willing to put their money where their mouth is, and are willing to provide some continuous base of financial resources, if not that, human resources to being able to do this. And the last thing I would say is, you, at least in my case, I had to get this through a board. So there's a governance structure that I had to go through. It wasn't just necessarily the mayor or city council. It was my own local board, which I found to be enormously supportive of many of the ideas that I had. I didn't have any real problems, presenting it any more than I did in any other district where I've been the head of the schools. You have to present the argument, be cogent about why and how it is a responsible educational strategy, and how it's going to be funded. And I didn't have any problems being able to convince the board that that was a supportive body of work to proceed with.
Yeah, so I'll add to what Rudy just shared. So yes, it's as is in any leadership role, building the coalition of the willing and often building the coalition of the unwilling is kind of part of the job. And when I came in as a chancellor, I didn't have the benefit of two full terms as the chancellor, so I kind of jumped in, picked up where we had been. And one of the things that I'm really excited that I did was I took a listen and learn tour. I went through all 5 boroughs. I spoke with students. I spoke with parents.
But while we're waiting for Dr. Carranza, Dr. Crew, um, you worked under a system that was totally different than the system that we currently have now, right?
Right.
What would you say, and I think you spoke a little bit about it earlier, but what would you say was maybe some of your challenges or barriers in implementing an ideal proposal, if any, when you was chancellor?
Yeah, the system I worked under was obviously not a mayoral control. I know it was oftentimes suggested by the mayor at that point that he should have control, and oftentimes, that in and of itself was problematic because he wanted to have more control over the system. But one of the barriers was that you really had to find a way of being able to negotiate against the tyranny of other governmental agencies, or other officials wanting to do what they want to do with the system. There can only be one chancellor at a time. And I oftentimes had people saying, well, I think you ought to do X. And I'd say, no, that doesn't make any sense. Um, there's one surgeon at an operating table that is actually going to make the call. Now, there may be multiple others, but there's one that's going to make the final call. And one tension for me was there were many people who believed that something else ought to have been the focus of our work. Why are you spending money on the arts? These kids don't need to have the arts. They need to be able to read. And they didn't see the connection between the arts and cognitive development in language development and so forth. So that was one tension. A second one was that there were plenty of people who, frankly, didn't want to distribute goods and services to communities that had not, as Richard said earlier, had been previously overlooked. It didn't matter to them that there were the lowest scores east of the Mississippi in certain sections of the city, in the Bronx, for example, or in parts of Harlem and so forth, parts of Queens. It didn't matter. And so, as far as they were concerned, as long as they got theirs, everybody was fine. Well, no, that really is not an equitable position to take. And so fighting the day-to-day grind of an equity-based lens by which to distribute resources and goods and so forth in the system, I found was a real tension spot. And then the last one was, just politics in general. Not every, I mean, every borough deserves the kind of attention that every borough wants to have. But, there's always this tension of, well, who's first among equals? Who is it that that we should, pay more attention to because they have somebody very prominent in City Hall, or very prominent in on the City Council or on the Education Committee, and so on and so forth. I mean, just the world of political power shifts and power moves mitigated oftentimes, well, what's the right decision for children? Like, what is it that we're really going to do here? And it oftentimes impacted the speed with which you could do it. It impacted the future funding of it, and so on. So those would be the tensions that I found in my 5 years there as chancellor.
Thank you so much. Dr. Carranza's back. Dr. Carranza.
I apologize for the connectivity issues, folks. This outage is real. Okay, so I'm going to go fast and hope that this stays connected. So what I was saying is that the challenges are real, as Dr. Crew has spoken about. And when I went around and went to all the 5 boroughs and spoke to as many constituency groups as possible to get an understanding what's going well, what's not going well, what are your hopes and dreams for the system, what should we be focusing on? It was no mistake that when I presented that report to the community, what was very clear from the mouths of students, from parents, from community groups, from people in all 5 boroughs was that they felt they didn't have agency in decisions that were being made. They didn't have the feeling that their voices were being heard. As Dr. Crew mentioned, there were amongst all equals, there were definitely people didn't feel like they were equals, much less even being considered as part of the system. So many of the things that we immediately started working on was lifting the voice of people. We had several committees, one of them being the School Integration Committee that had been formed for many years and had been dormant. And again, I'm not casting aspersions, but one of the things I said is, well, we have people that want to do this work. Why aren't we listening? Why aren't we getting into this work and actually bringing some recommendations forward? So we re-energized that committee. I worked with the parent advisory committee as well to really listen to what their concerns were. Our parents and community members in our students with disabilities special education community had some deep concerns about what students were and were not receiving. And again, to what's been stated, trying to build consensus for how to move forward while not forgetting that in a system, think about this, in the time that I was chancellor, there was 1.1 million students in the Department of Education. And if you think there's 323 million residents in the United States at the time, that meant that any day that we were in session in New York City, 1 out of 300 Americans was sitting in one of our classrooms. And then when you extrapolate that out and you think, well, 1 in 300 Americans sitting in our classrooms, and what do our students look like in New York City? And then it was very clear when you triangulate the data about who is being served and who is not being served, and where do you have some places where you have really nice, I call it bespoke class sizes, and other places where they're busting at the seams. And it's all within the same system called the New York City Public Schools. Then how can that be? That some kids get one experience and other children get another experience solely by where they happen to live in this great city we call New York City. So that became more and more for me something that, yes, there's a lot of things that we can work on, but if we're working to improve the system that is not working for everybody, I wasn't interested in improving that system that already wasn't working for everybody. I was very interested in how do we change that system so that it actually works for everyone. And as Chancellor Crew has very elegantly and very much said, it means that some people aren't going to be supportive, and some people are going to say it's about time that my voice is being heard. So you have to balance those perspectives.
Yeah, it's a time test. It's a timed test.
Mm-hmm.
You only have the window that the political system will leave open long enough for you to even begin to do this work, let alone complete it. And the system needs more than 5 years of consistent behavior from a leader. It needs 10, 12, 15 years. But the staying power is a function of political uh, framing as opposed to educational framing. I think if you were to get all of the chancellors together from the last, sort of figure 10 or 15 years, I think we would be within a very small margin in terms of our educational pedagogical stance on things. I don't think we'd be really very different in terms of what we see educationally and the needs of the system or the children in the system. But what is different is that they served in different eras and they served under different political structures. And in my case, that structure and the way that I approached this was, you don't have forever. You don't have forever. This has an expiration date, and it's a political expiration date. And you need to get whatever it is that you're going to get done. You ought to damn well get it done within about 5 to 7 years, because that's all you're going to get before you run afoul of the political. Just run out of political currency. Whether it be because somebody is going to run for political office and they're no longer going to be able to support your agenda, or because they are, the board has changed, and you've, alienated somebody beforehand, and now you don't have a supportive board. Whatever it may be, it's a timed test. You only have, in my case, I had 5 years. And I knew that I was running out of currency well into my fourth year. I knew that it was only a matter of time before, somebody called the question. But I think if you can get 7 to 10 good years of consistent leadership, it is as important to the city as having a solid, thoughtful, caring, highly effective teacher for 2 or 3 years in a school.
Yeah.
It's that important to the learning of a child, and it's that important to the growth of a system.
I would, if I could just jump in very quickly. Yes and amen. However, and I would add to what Rudy just said is that because it is a political system, I can't even count. I wish I had a nickel for every time I heard the phrase when I would go about and meet people in all five boroughs. Oh, I've been here for 4 chancellors. I've been here for 6 chancellors. I've been here for 7 chancellors. So people in New York City, I found more than anywhere else I've ever served as a system leader, really measure the tenure of a chancellor tied to the mayorality. They've got 1 term. I've got 4 years, maybe. They do 2 terms, maybe 8 years. So even the parameters that Dr. Crew has talked about in terms of how much time do you have, you're pretty much working towards that expiration date the minute you get appointed, depending on who the chancellor is. If you're lucky, you're going to have 4. If you're really lucky, you're going to have 8. And more than likely, when the chancellor changes, when the mayor changes, the chancellor changes, and the system has become acculturated to that fact. And no matter how brilliant, no matter how engaging, people are going to say, yeah, this too will pass because this chancellor was appointed by this mayor. And if the mayor's doing great, they may have some more time and more shelf life. Doesn't matter how good or how bad. And if they're not doing great, well, we know we're just going to wait it out and see where the next person appoints. And that creates some real, I would say, strong headwinds to even really great pedagogical ideas or great ideas for serving kids.
Right.
Thank you. Mariana?
Okay, sorry, I was just having problems like unmuting myself. For our last question of the day, I wanted to ask for both chancellors, what kind of advice would you want to give our current or even our current chancellor, Chancellor Samuels, or our future chancellors? Like, what advice would you give for battling the system?
So if you don't mind, Rudy, I'm going to jump in.
Have at it.
And you can bring it home, my friend. Look, the advice that I would give, there's a couple of several pieces of advice. Number one, I am fully supportive and very enthusiastic that a chancellor, just like a superintendent, has a basis in education. And it's no disrespect to anyone that's not an educator, but if you're going to run a system that's a people business and those people happen to be called students and teachers, it makes a real difference if you've actually been a teacher or a principal and actually understands the intricacies and what it takes to not only run a school, but to teach in a classroom on a day-to-day basis. So that being said, the paradigm that we've both talked about, that the power that happens, the shifting political alliances, the environmental climate around the politics that happens around the chancellorship in New York City subjects that position to becoming a politician rather than an educator. And the more you stay true to the fact that you're an educator, the greater the propensity of those political winds to be coming at you full force, gale force. So my advice to the chancellor and all subsequent chancellors, but more importantly, my advice to the city of New York is that if you become a chancellor, be a chancellor, be an educator, do the work of educating all children, not just some of the children in a city the size of New York City. Now, that being said, I think, and again, because I've served and Rudy has served as well, that we've both served with elected board members in school systems that have to run for re-election, and the board members choose who the superintendent is. And we've both worked in a system where it's mayoral control, and Rudy's tenure was a little different in that I worked with the PEP, and the mayor, I served at the pleasure of the mayor, and I knew that. Yet when I served, I tried to serve with the PEP with the ideology that the PEP was an elected board and they had a say in what policy was. And that ran contrary to some of the politics, because the politics were, hey, we appoint people in the PEP are going to vote for what we say you're going to vote for based on who appointed you. And, we're going to give you perfunctory information, but you're going to vote the way we've told you you're going to vote because we appointed you. I'm being a little more dramatic than those conversations I'm sure were had, but I didn't treat the PEP that way. I gave the PEP their place to opine, to ask questions, to pressure test what we were doing, because I felt that they were a voice for the people. And at the end of the day, education is a democratic endeavor where people ask others to make decisions in the best interests of their communities. That got me in some hot water. And I'm going to be very transparent about the fact that, when I served as chancellor, with all due respect and the greatest honor of my life, I didn't have the authority to be the chancellor because I knew as an educator, fully educated in pedagogy, fully experienced with over a decade in the classroom teaching, fully experienced as a principal, having led schools, fully experienced in most of the seats in a school system. When I made educational decisions, those educational decisions were filtered through a political lens. And the political lens was in City Hall. And oftentimes what I and my team had spent considerable time to build consensus, spent considerable time in doing the research and looking at the literature and the research about what's research supported and what's research backed strategies. When we had spent time in community with advocacy groups and people that said, we need to do this and we need to do that, and this is how it's affected my students, and we formulated policy that would come forward as good policy. If it didn't pass the political lens, it didn't get implemented. And so I didn't have the power of the purse, as Rudy didn't. I didn't have the power of the purse. I had to get my budget approved through governmental agencies. And if that didn't align with the priorities of the mayor and the team, then my educational policies became one more of many commissioners' policies that may or may not get funded, or may or may not get supported, or may or may not get continued to be supported. So it's just the reality in a mayoral control system. The chancellor is the chancellor, but doesn't always have the authority that a superintendent would have when they're in a superintendency with the authority to implement administrative, pedagogical initiatives that are good pedagogically and supported by science, social science, that are good for students. Now, that being said, I think my advice to any chancellor coming forward this year, and this coming year will be 72 years. This is the 71st year since Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court of this United States definitively said that separate is not equal. It's been 71 years that we collectively in this country have admired the issue. 71 years that we've debated whether or not we really are getting close to eliminating separate but not equal. But what I would encourage any superintendent to do is to look at the system, any superintendent, look at the system. Are you improving the system that 71 years ago the Supreme Court said is not constitutional? Are you improving that system, or are you changing that system so that it is serving all students? And if our system is not serving all students within the boundaries of those that we have responsibility for, not only fiduciary responsibility, but moral responsibility, then if you're perpetuating that inequitable system, then you have no business being in a position of leadership. Do something else. Do something else. Because this work is really, really hard. And when they can't argue with your logic, when they can't argue with your scholarship, when they can't argue with the data, they're going to make it personal. So you have to just be ready for that. So that would be my recommendation, and a hearty congratulations to Kumar, who I had the honor of appointing to his first superintendency when I was chancellor. And I have very high hopes for him, and I pray for him every day.
That was great, Richard. I appreciate that. My advice to the new chancellor, to Kumar, as well as to the future chancellors, would be, number one, just stay strong. Stay true to your values, because this system, like many others, will knock you off your moorings. And I'm being polite. It will ask you to make decisions that you know in your moral heart are not necessarily the right decisions. And you have to be strong to stand in the wake of those pressures, and avoid succumbing to the temptation to say, hey, I got to pay the mortgage next month. So, I think I'll just go along to get along. That is not leadership. That is leadership. That's being a punk. So I would argue that, this is really about, in its first blush, it's about really remaining true and strong to why did you want to be a teacher? Why did you want to be in this particular job in the first place?
Yeah.
Uh, it'll test you many, many, many times. Um, the second thing I would say, is I want you to think like an artist. I want you to think like an artist. This is about connecting dots that sometimes are not necessarily dots that you would ordinarily connect. I don't think that the current system of New York or any place else adequately responds to the needs that children have of being able to migrate into the 21st century global economy. I don't think we've connected those dots. I don't think we have enough of the structural adaptations that need to be made to the system in order for people to pay deeper attention to their occupational pursuits, to their passions, from middle school directly into post secondary or directly into the world of work. We have not connected those dots. So it's very, very, very easy for the system to then become very arbitrary about it. Some people get it, some people don't. Some people have an opportunity to do internships, other people don't, et cetera, et cetera. This is where the issue of equity begins to raise its ugly head. It raises its head in the sense that, it's easier to go along and get along with people who essentially have what they want anyway, as than it is easier to start to create settings in which children who don't have it get opportunities to it. When I said stay strong, it's because equity, the step toward equity is the step toward redistribution. You have to literally redistribute resources to be able to do this. This is not about hoping and wishing and praying and so forth, all of which are very important to do. But it is about technically and tactically understanding that the world that we now live in is a world that is actually going to enable children to have access to things that they otherwise might not ever get a chance to have. Opportunities to have a second language or a third language, opportunities to have an internship, opportunities to have access to the arts, opportunities to have a connective tissue to the job that they want, to the career that they want. This is what it means to lead. It is to build that connective tissue. And don't be afraid when people say you have no right to do that. If I could meet with Kumar, I would tell him right now, there are going to be people who say, oh, no, 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 no. My child is in the gifted program. They don't deserve a gifted program or an IB program in that section of Queens or Bronx or whatever it may be. No, you have to stay in that slot and argue for the connective tissue between the third grade or the fifth grade and where that child may want to go to college or what job they may want to have in the 21st century. That's your job. You have to think like an artist to be able to do that because there's not an automatic answer to it. It's not. There's nothing that's automatic about it. It's you have to think that way and then lead from there. And the last thing that I would say is actually just be prepared to lose the job the second you get the job. I mean, I've said this about every superintendency I've ever been in. The second you break an egg in this kitchen, somebody is going to want to doubt your credentials as a cook. The second you break the third or fourth or fifth egg in it, they will remove you too sweet. So as I said before, you only got a window, brother. You got a window. You don't have forever. right? And the extent to which you understand that it's not forever means that you will understand strategically how to put priorities in place, how to be strategic in the building of these relationships, how to measure and support yourself in the growth through the system, so that you don't burn yourself out. This isn't a sprint. You actually have to hold on to your health. You have to be mentally sane. You have to be civil and loving of people. You still have to want to be that teacher that showed up every day and loved their kids. You have to have that energy to basically do this job even today. So
Mhm.
regardless of what the structure is, you know, you, you still have to keep the faith. You still just have to keep the faith and own it. Never, ever, ever give up. These children will look at you, and that you will fall in love, and you should never fall out of love with it ever.
Rudy, I was brought up as a spiritual man to say when you hear the truth, you say amen. So I'm going to say
Amen.
to you, amen,
Thank you,
and
brother.
just remember, we're all just one school board meeting or one mayoral race away from being the former
Right,
superintendent or
right,
the former chancellor. So look
right,
at while you're in the seat, do the job, and
right,
that means you're going to break some eggs and you can
right,
still make an omelet.
right, right,
Thank
right.
thank you both so much wisdom. So we do have a couple of minutes, and we want to allow some of the audience to ask questions. We're going to ask people to raise your hand. I'm going to say that this is not a back and forth. You're going to ask your questions. We're going to mute you, and we're going to get an answer to your questions. We want to try to get as many questions answered as possible. And I really do hope that Kamar reach out or you or reach out to him to give him your advice. I think he's going to do well in this job as long as he's around himself with very smart and talented people. So I'm going to turn it over to one of our moderators. I know Emma Hand was up first, but if one of our someone from the back could unmute folks while and let them ask their question, and then we'll.
Well, mine is not a question, but based on what I've heard from our Chancellor Cruz, I'm going to give you three things that popped up. Everyone that comes to your table may not like what's on your menu.
Mm-hmm.
And the race is not given to the swift, but to those who endure to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, even the Syrophoenician woman said, even the dogs desire to have the crumbs from the master's table. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my ministry part. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Tanisha,
Where?
go ahead. We
Oh,
hear.
I'm looking at another screen. I'm like, why am I so big? Oh, hey y'all, thank you so much. I feel like we were too hard on you, Chancellor Carranza. Now I feel like anyway, but thank y'all both so much for so much of the insight. It's very important. So my question is for both of y'all, and I think I already know the answer, but I just want to hear y'all say it. Why do you think that the powers that be frame community control of public schools with criminalization and frame mayoral control of public schools with accountability? That political?
I my sense is that I'm not familiar with the first portion of your question, but I do know that the school to prison pipeline has many tentacles,
Yeah.
and it reaches into conversations that are um, fearful conversations about somebody taking over. Uh, all those folks of color, largely, or whose language is not first language is not English, all those people are going to now take over. And the quality of these schools will go down, much like if they moved into my neighborhood, they're going to go, the price of housing is going to go down. So there's this racist, class based, ugly, venal world in which when people want to ultimately find a reason to turn on the spigot of dissent about community organizations or community-based people or the intelligence of community-based people, what they do is they turn on the fear, the fear mongering, the fear bucket, and they essentially say, well, the power should not be with people who are powerless. The power should be with people who are smart and who went to Yale and who have, a certain degree of pedigree. I just, when I said a minute ago that people need to be strong, the chancellors need to be strong, you need to be able to hear that and dispel it. Mm-hmm. This is not the reason I'm speaking on this topic right now is this is not a topic that we should be silent about, because there's been enough of that fear mongering and just basically disapproval of the lifespan of people who live in these communities, of which I came from these communities. My parents came from these communities. Richard's parents came from these communities. We've done time in Hell's Kitchen. So there's no reason to now get in these jobs, get a new tie, a new jacket, and a title, and all of a sudden be silent in the face of such infamy. So I just think this is a place where I draw the line, and I have that conversation. I will step all over somebody talking like this about community organizations and so on and so forth. And it might not be the most politic thing to do. So I would say I've lost points many times because I will say it out loud. And I want my principals or my assistant superintendents and superintendents, I want them to know they should say it out loud, because the system that is built off the culture of believing that there are some who are entitled and some who are not entitled to have power, a system that's built off of that is a crooked house. Is a crooked house. So I'm not gonna, when I said stay true to your values, this is a value for me. This is a value for me. This is like, you don't get to denigrate what I came from, where my parents came from, what they did, what they didn't do. And I get the fact that there are people who believe it, and you're entitled to your position. You're also entitled to hear mine.
Amen. So in a good relay race, you're going to pick up that baton and you're not going to drop it. So I'm going to try to move it and bring us home, Rudy, because yes, you said it right. And I'm going to say to you, Professor, because I'm glad that you are teaching the next generation of leaders exactly that message. So let me just be very, very blunt. I'm going to be blunt as a spoon. If some of you remember that when I was in New York, I'd say that all the time. I'm going to be as blunt as a spoon. So here's the deal. There is no coincidence that districts, that systems that are under mayoral control are majority people of color in those districts. You don't find white, affluent school systems that have mayoral control. If you find one, let me know, because I haven't found one yet. So it's no coincidence that happens. Now, if you take that into account, this whole idea of equating community elected board members with corruption and graft, and then mayoral control is pristine and lawful. Let me just give you an example from my lived experience. I've lived and worked in the state of Texas. The state of Texas has taken over 8 school districts. The state's come in and taken over the school district. Why? Because, there's been corruption, but in those taking over of the districts, the FBI has arrested a few superintendents. So you can't say it's the school board, and you can't say it's not the school board. You gotta, everything is individual, okay? And you gotta keep that. It's a red herring that you're getting rid of graft and corruption. Now, on the other side, if you're talking about a mayoral control situation, then if the education agenda fits the agenda of the mayor and the mayor's political platform, you're golden, right? But if it doesn't, if the mayor happens to have aspirations for a higher office, well, then does the fact that we're working towards equity going to affect a constituency, a voting block that person may need for that next higher office in politics? Yeah. And when that happens in a school board, that's just one member of a 5, 6, 7, 9 member board. So you have the opportunity to coalesce and build consensus around what's good for students. Whereas in a mayoral control situation, it's one person. And as long as that aligns with that political agenda, then it's more heightened that it'll either get done or it won't get done. So again, it's a red herring when folks talk about mayoral control is the antidote to corruption. It's not. It's never been designed to be that way. If you look at what it is, you can do some really great things. And I've been able to do some great things with my school boards. And I've been very frustrated with some of my school boards. Same thing I can say about mayoral control. We were able to do some great things with mayoral control. I was very frustrated with many things along mayoral control. And even now, when I get asked, you were there 3 years, you didn't have the full, and half of that was consumed by a pandemic, So, you had a failed chancellorship. No, I didn't, because I will tell you at least one thing that will happen. There will never, ever again in the city of New York be a mayor's race with mayoral control that the issue of integration, segregation, and equity is not a topic for the mayor as long as the mayor gets to appoint the chancellor. That will never happen again. You don't believe me? Look at the last 2 races since I was chancellor. That's always been a topic. It's always been in the questions to where do you stand on it? That will never again not be spoken in polite company. It will always now be something that a mayor is going to be asked if they want to have mayoral control. I'm really proud of that because now we're surfacing some of the questions we need to grapple with if we truly mean all means all.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to try to get these last 3 questions in. So we're going to go with Erica.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening, gentlemen. Chancellor Carranza, it is such a joy to see you here and to hear you speak candidly. You always have had a special place in my heart because when I first took over this role, which I'm still in as CEC 17's president, the meeting with you was my first meeting, and it was probably the first meeting that I've really truly been brought to tears, and you and your team immediately rushed in to support, and my district has never been the same since. So that is just a testament to other work that you really contributed to, which was helping to bring parents to the forefront of the work and to encourage the system to see us as partners. And I don't really think I've ever experienced it the same since you have been here. So my question to both of you is, if we are thinking about mayoral control, a lot of times this conversation generally centers around parents or communities not being prepared or ready or capable of leading it. And we can think about that. Like we can talk about all the reasons why they say that about us. But my question to you is on a serious level, just like critically thinking about that question, what does preparing a community to be play that kind of role in this system? What should that entail? What should we be thinking about when it comes to preparing parents and community members to contribute in that way to this system?
And I'm
Erica, thank you.
Try to answer it quickly so we can get everybody.
Okay, you're asking a lot from 2 chancellors, brother, and a professor. Come on. No, I'm just kidding. Erica, very thoughtful question. I'm going to jump in very quickly. I think the best thing that we can do is to not think of parents in terms of engaging parents. That is a very low bar. You can engage a parent 2 seconds flat. Don't get into the gifted and talent program. I'm going to engage that parent. Don't let that student go to the field trip. I'm going to engage that parent. Suspend a student. I'm going to engage it. It's a low bar. But we think of often about parents as engaging. What I advocate for is we need to empower parents. And what do I mean by empowering parents? Knowledge is power. So the best way to prepare our communities and parents is give them the keys to the kingdom. Let them know how the system works. The most privileged, and I'm not talking about finances, I'm talking about knowledge. The most privileged parents I've ever worked with in 5 different states and 5 different educational systems have been the parents that know how the system works. When they need to advocate for the child, they know who to email and what to email. When they go to parent-teacher conference night, they're not asking, is my child behaving? Well, no, they better behave. I'm raising them. If they're not, they're going to answer to me. I need to know, is my child on grade level? Is my child reading with not only comprehension and fluency? Is my child able to do numeracy? Is my child, when they leave your 3rd grade class, going to be ready for the 4th grade? If they are, great. How do I help? If they're not, what do I do? How do I help? Those are the questions that we need to be preparing parents about, to know how the system works so they can advocate for their child. And I've never met a chancellor, superintendent, or educator that doesn't want to do what's best for kids. And if we have our parents knowing how it works and advocating with us, we've now created a mighty movement around getting our students what they need and they deserve. And it all starts with our community, but us not engaging them, empowering them with the information.
Thank you. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I just simply say I totally agree. This is easy economics. This is about demand, not supply. And how you prepare communities is you give them opportunities to be as demanding of the system as people who have privilege. They need to know how the system works. They need to have access to the system, and they need to have some training within the system. It looks a little bit like, I took over several boards in New York, and one of the aspects of the law that was changed at that time was, you now have to go through, I think it was up to 15 or 20 days of training. And the areas of training have to do with fiscal responsibility, educational responsibility, and then, if you will, ethical responsibility as a board member. So there are things we can do. If you really want to give people that, as Richard said, if you really want to empower people, you can make it so that you begin to minimize the kind of reasoning for being worried about unethical behavior and so on and so forth. I mean, not everybody who pays taxes is ethical. So listen, we haven't figured out the holy grail of what makes people more ethical, but I do think you can empower communities to do that and to be board members. I like the system, to be perfectly honest with you. I like the system of community controlled school boards. I liked it. There were places I fought it, and I fought it for some of the same things that you're talking about now. But that was not enough of a reason for me to say they should not actually exist. I would much rather see the power vested in people who understand a system, technically versed in the system, and therefore have the power and the reins of the system.
So we are at time. I'm going to ask our 2 chancellors, do you have time? I was going to take the next 2 questions first and then ask you to respond. Do you have time for that?
2 minutes.
All right, so Ellen and Jeanette, we're going to unmute you if you can ask your questions real quickly, and we're going to try to get you an answer.
It's nice to hear you both speak, and thank you for the time. If on the issue of diversity, inclusion, and empowerment, what 3 things would you tell this current chancellor to address the failure of special education to include parents in the development of the child's IEP or in the development of innovative, and I hate that word, programs that actually address reading issues instead of letting them fester?
Janet, if you can ask your question.
Peace and blessings. I think we need to do a part 2 with this conversation, because when I started my advocacy, I started advocating for families in the public school system. And Chancellor Crew, you may remember my mentor, Inocencia Taveras. She would say, when you hold the child by the hand, you have the parent by the heart. And until we don't meet our children's social and emotional component, we're going to lose everything. And I stopped advocating for young people in the public school system when my youngest of 6, I had graduated all the other ones, even one with special needs, introduced me to the school to prison pipeline, from suspension to detention to incarceration. And at that point, I learned that it was costing us almost $300,000 to house a kid in a in a juvenile justice system versus $28,000 for a public school education. This was in 2010. It's costing us today almost $800,000. I shifted my advocacy to help families and disrupt that jail system that have been tormenting our communities. We have nothing to lose but trust the communities and the families that we can do a better job if we partner and invest in our communities. We've lost generations, right? We don't want to talk about the racial and ethnic disparity.
Yeah, so Naquan, I'm going to jump in only in the interest of time to answer both questions, and I mean this with all sincerity. My advice to anyone in the chancellor's seat for all of the issues that were just asked with both of these very articulate community members is this. My advice to the chancellor is treat those students and those issues as if those students were your personal biological children. And then ask yourself the question, what would I do? What would I want? If you do it with that lens, the politics, the pummeling will come. But, you know, there's an African proverb that says, as long as I walk with the blessing of mother and God, no harm can ever befall me.
Dr. Crew?
Yeah, I think that the two questions are in some ways merge. This is ultimately about the culture, the culture of the system, and the culture of the system has given rise to all kinds of differences in the way boroughs are treated, parents are treated, children are treated, etc. I feel like, you know, there are three things that I've seen in the highest performing schools and classrooms. One is I've seen incredible instruction. So I think we have to really devote some time, and whoever said we need a second round, you're right, because it should be about teachers and what does it mean to provide instruction for children. One is really high instruction. I've also seen in the best performing schools in any community, supervision of that instruction by a principal who actually knows what to look for when he or she walks into a classroom. How do you help and support a teacher to strengthen their basic understanding and repertoire with respect to teaching? I've also seen that these principals are people who have, as a natural part of their own value system, they believe in the community that they're serving, and that they should actually, you know, sort of continue in that community for a very long time. And the last thing that I would say is that the thing that I've seen in the highest performing classrooms, beyond good instruction and good supervision of instruction, is human caring. I believe that you do have to love. I think you really do have to love what you do, why you do it, and for whom you do it. And even though there are people who will, you know, be very difficult, very contentious from time to time, and on, there should never be a moment when at the end of the day you say, yeah, but my love can extend to people who even do not love me or don't particularly care for me, and so on and so forth. You have to have some background or some backdrop that actually doesn't go away. And the only thing I can think of that does not go away is how human beings care for and love each other. So if I had it to do all over again, I would have been way, way more successful if I had just been able to keep myself disciplined around how to find and feel at the end of every exchange some modicum, some ounce of just human compassion and caring that I could feel even out of the most contentious groups of people or person that I met. And that's more of a reflective statement from me, but it is really true. You can't do this work without love in your heart. Just can't.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Dr. Crew and Dr. Carranza, for taking out your busy schedule to come and talk to us tonight. I want to thank AQE for partnering. I want to thank the Yaya Network and our young parent leader for co-facilitating. I know she was traveling home. Um, this conversation is very important. I just want to repeat what I said earlier, is that tomorrow at 2 p.m. we will be having a virtual press conference where we will be releasing a report that ECC have got commissioned around school governance. So hopefully people can join us. We thank you all again for tonight, and you all gave us something to really think about having another session, possibly with some teachers. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.